the more I read about real estate and the more I studied about real estate, I realized that there are a lot of advantages to real estate investing. We could go on forever about them, but there are tax advantages. There are cash flow advantages. There are ways to sort of increase your returns from real estate that are not available in index funds, like through forced depreciation, cost segregation, bonus depreciation, all these kind of things that you'll hear about. And I was a convert.
Welcome to the Physicians and Properties Podcast, the show where we teach you how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want.
Doctor! Doctor! Doctor!
Doctor! Doctor!
Now, here's your host, Dr. Alex Schloe.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Physicians and Properties. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Alex Schloe. Thank you for tuning in to another episode, and this one is another great one. My new friend, Dr. Daniel Shin, is on the podcast tonight. Dr. Shin is the Darwinian Doctor. A lot of folks are familiar with his blog. I actually remember reading it back in residency on labor and delivery night. So it's really cool to kind of go full circle and have the opportunity to get to know him and speak with him and hear his journey and his story and all the wisdom that he provides. Dr. Shin is a board certified urologic surgeon and a multifamily real estate investor. He now lives in Tennessee and practices medicine as a Locum Tenens physician. If you are interested in learning more about how real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want to, this is the episode for you because Dr. Shin has done it. He's gone from being a full-time urologic surgeon, working 60 hours a week with a 2-hour commute while living in Southern California, to now working in Tennessee, living in Tennessee, and doing Locum Tenens work, where he works 1 week out of the month and gets to focus on all his other ventures and most importantly, focus on his family during that time. So it's really cool to hear Dr. Shin's journey and how that's been possible. This is a fantastic episode. Please stay tuned, listen all the way through because there's just knowledge that's dropped the whole way through. If you learned something from this podcast, as always, give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. I read all of those, and I love to hear how the Physicians and Properties podcast has impacted your life. So without any further ado, let's get started with today's episode with the Darwinian Doctor, Dr. Daniel Shin. Dr. Daniel Shin, so good to have you on the podcast today. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing really great, Alex. Thanks for having me here. I'm excited to be talking to you.
I've been following your journey for a while through social media, and it's been really cool to see and so excited to hear your story and share that with the audience here. So thanks for taking the time from Memphis, Tennessee to chat with us. So appreciate that. Hey, do you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I can essentially start from the beginning and I'll be brief. I'm in Memphis now, but my journey has sort of taken me all over the country. I was born on the East Coast in New Jersey, and that's where I did all of my primary schooling. Afterwards, I was at Yale University for undergrad and then decided to become a physician and went to the University of Pittsburgh for medical school. And during my third year, I saw a video of laser lithotripsy and I was like, that looks awesome. I can do that. That looks like a video game. And I matched into urology residency at USC. So I went out to California and I was actually in Los Angeles for a total of 12 years. And after 6 years of residency, I went straight into practice in Southern California. And it was only a couple of years into my attending career where I felt that there was something lacking. And I wasn't quite sure what it was. I think a lot of things were perfect, but a lot of things were not so perfect. I was still in $300,000 of student debt from med school that had ballooned through residency. I had done a lot of the sort of mistakes that you do as a new attending physician. Like we bought the big doctor house, I was driving a new SUV, and I also was driving 2 hours a day and plus in Southern California traffic because I lived in Los Angeles, worked in Orange County, and I was probably working about 50 or 60 hours a week at the job with overnight call and things like that. Just about 2 years of this, I wasn't tired of it, but I knew that it wasn't ideal. And I also felt like I needed new challenges. So for me, a lot of that time was about trying to figure out what was next for me. And at that time, I found personal finance and then real estate investing afterwards as really the thing that was going to fill that gap, the thing that I needed.
Well, 2 hours in LA, you probably went, 5 miles or so?
a reverse commute. If I had been going the other way, it would have been even worse. So I feel for all the people I would be passing on the I-5 or the 405 going down. But I remember a lot. It's been a couple of years since I had to do that, thankfully, since I moved now. But sometimes I would have to come back from Irvine, California, all the way back up to LA. And that would be like 2.5 hours sometimes. And it got so bad that I justified the purchase of a Tesla Model 3 because I needed that autopilot. And actually, it did really, really help. So that was definitely good return on investment.
And the gas prices in California are crazy too. So helpful from that perspective. I wanted to hit on this real quick, if you don't mind. You did mention that the kind of lifestyle creep from residency to attending. If folks that are listening to this that are in residency, what advice would you give them in terms of, hey, going from residency to now making that attending salary? What are some things that you learned in your journey?
Well, I would say that it's actually really difficult navigating that transition. And there's a reason why a lot of the personal finance writers and creators kind of focus on that transition period, because all of a sudden you go from making your $50,000 to $70,000, $80,000 resident salary to, in sometimes 5xing that overnight, essentially. And a lot of the decisions you sort of make, they may not seem like life-shattering decisions. Where you're going to put down roots, what neighborhood you want to live in, what kind of car you're going to get, where you want to put your kids in school. But a lot of these things sort of define your level living. And there are certain costs that are associated with this. And it's a lot easier to go up that ladder of quality of life than it is to go down consciously. So I would say that, not saying that you don't do it, but put a little bit more thought into the actual numbers behind what you're doing and kind of realize what you're giving up in terms of maybe potential savings and potential investments. And I do acknowledge, though, that is very difficult. When I was, especially in sort of the middle school part of my upbringing, my family back in New Jersey, we had a lot of financial problems. We lost our house to foreclosure and had this very traumatic sort of period of time where we had to go sort of over one weekend. We just had to pack up as quickly as possible and go to a rental because we were losing the home. And that sort of thing stays with you. A lot about going into medicine for me was obviously having the ability to help people. And it seemed to be a really good match for my personality and my skill set. But also it was trying to seek that financial stability that I didn't really have as a child. So you can imagine after a childhood of sort of financial instability and then being absolutely broke during college and medical school, sort of making a paycheck in residency, that transition to an attending level salary as a urologist, it was a lot of money all at once. And so for me, it was very difficult to make that transition without expanding my lifestyle. So we did buy the big house in Los Angeles, which was super expensive. I mentioned I bought the Tesla, and a lot of these things, you're locked into it. So my family, we became used to that. And then as I started running those numbers during my sort of personal finance awakening in year 2 of my attending career, I was like, A, where's all the money going? And B, how am I ever going to get freedom from the 9 to 5, sort of more autonomy and control over my life so I don't have to do this commute anymore if I don't know where my money is going and all of it's going towards these really expensive things. So just a note of caution, I would say, and not saying don't do it, because I think people do deserve a reward after all the hard work. I think it just is important to put a little bit of thought, be thoughtful about your expenditures.
Thanks for sharing that and sharing about your childhood. It's interesting to me to think about it too, kind of my childhood and probably everyone listening to kind of how that shapes your relationship with money, and whether that leads to like a big scarcity mindset with money or whether that leads to like more kind of frivolous spending and how that impacts it. So it's kind of fun to kind of reflect back and think about what our parents' relationship was with money and that social upbringing. Mine was similar to yours. We did not have a lot of money in the Schloe household, and definitely was a driving factor as well. If I can be honest too about if I can be a physician, I always wanted to be a family medicine physician, and they don't make much money enough to live comfortably and know that my family was going to have some stability long-term. And then also, of course, supplementing with real estate as well, which we'll get to. I think about the jump from residency to attending, and I tell folks often that I agree with you, like you need to reward that hard work from med school and residency. But I like for folks to think about it in what I call a 10-year rule, which I first heard from my buddy, Brian Lubin. And it was basically like if it's something that you're going to do, remember, tell stories about in 10 years and it's not going to completely break the bank, then go ahead and do that. So if that's like an awesome trip after residency, or you want to go backpack Europe, or you want to buy a camper so you can spend more time with your family in nature or something like that, then it's a great way to do it. So just another lens to kind of think things through as you make that jump, because it's the military residency to attending jump in family medicine is not that much, but it's still pretty substantial. And it was like, wow, yeah, I went from this to that. This is crazy. And this is the most money I've ever seen. And so it's definitely something to think through and plan ahead, which is awesome that there's people like you and Jordan, who we were talking about earlier. And of course, like Jim Dolly and a bunch of great folks who have realized that and really helped educate physicians. So thanks for sharing that.
When I say be thoughtful about it, there are different gradients of that. When I was going through this very intensive journey into personal finance and trying to figure out my long-term plan, I actually did map out this very detailed 15-year plan to financial independence. And it was basically based around keeping expenditures stable or even cutting back, and aggressive saving, investment in the stock market, and eventually in real estate. And what became evident was that certain things specifically make an outsized difference on your ability to save and invest. And I would say the things that we've been talking about are sort of the danger things to really think about to see if you need. So number one, the mortgage. That's, I think at the time was 30% of our expenditures. Car payments, they're finite, but they can be quite expensive in the short term, which has kind of repercussions later on. And private school is another big one. Yeah. So these decisions they're sort of all related, because sometimes when you live in a certain place, maybe private school only seems like the only option for your kid. So being very intentional about those decisions in that critical time period, I think is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big fan of house hacking. We actually still house hack our house here in Colorado Springs. We rent out the basement and we live almost mortgage and taxes and insurance free here in Colorado Springs, which is awesome if we average that out throughout the year. And so I think that there's ways that you can help combat that. And house hacking is one way to do it. Of course, we all need a car. And if that's your thing, getting a nice car, but it's just something to think about what brings you value in your life going forward, because it is hard to walk into the hospital or into that attending role and you're the doc, and like, how come you're driving the 2011 Volkswagen that's hail dented, which is what I drive to work every day. But it just is what it is. To me, I don't get any value out of the car that I drive. I'd rather have a camper to go in the mountains and spend time with my family. So I'd rather spend my money that way, but it just depends what your thing is.
I love it. My Tesla's paid off now, and I know it's a really hot trigger button in the physician community, the topic of Teslas. I get joy out of that car every single day.
They're amazing. My buddy just got one and he let me drive it around Colorado Springs here. And it was unbelievable. It was the first time I've driven one, and like being able to see how, I don't know how the car senses everything and how fast those cars are is just unbelievable. It was wild. I told him I had to stop driving it or I was going to want to buy one. So I had to hurry up and turn around and come back home so I didn't get too tempted to get one, because they're awesome. So we started this journey of personal finance, and it sounds like maybe you kind of got started in the stock market and then in real estate. What did that journey look like for you?
So I think the stock market and investing in the stock market is honestly the most accessible way for people to start investing. And they've made it very easy. There's a whole industry that will very easily facilitate taking your paycheck and investing it via a variety of means into, you could do individual stocks, you could do index funds, which I think are the best way to go about it. And I was doing that because that is what all the traditional teachings about financial independence are based on nowadays. And it's very easy. I think that's still a very dependable route to financial freedom. And all you have to do is just invest into index funds, allow it to compound over time, and then eventually it grows to a point where you're financially free via the 4% rule or a concept like that. But for me, I was doing that and I was socking away a lot of money into the stock market. But then, as I said, I had that huge commute in Southern California. So I was listening to tons of podcasts, and just like this one. And there was a section of investors who seemed to be getting to financial freedom dramatically faster than the rest of them. And those were real estate investors. And initially I was like, what is real estate? For whatever reason, I think that some people look at real estate with a suspicious lens. I think there could be a number of reasons for that. Maybe it's just bias against, quote, non-traditional investments. The more I read about real estate and the more I studied about real estate, I realized that there are a lot of advantages to real estate investing. We could go on forever about them, but there are tax advantages, there are cash flow advantages, there are ways to sort of increase your returns from real estate that are not available in index funds, like through forced depreciation, cost segregation, bonus depreciation, all these kind of things that you'll hear about. And I was a convert. So I basically took the plunge and I cashed out a bunch of individual stocks that luckily had done well, some tech stocks that had a return. And I used them to buy my first rental, which was a single family home in Little Rock, Arkansas. And I still have it to this day. And it was sort of off to the races. That was followed by another single family home. And it was followed by a duplex and 3 more duplexes, a small apartment building, then another small apartment building. And that sort of brings us up to date over the last couple of years there.
Do you remember kind of time when you were looking at the single family homes and you were getting ready to buy that house in Little Rock? Was that like a really scary time of like, hey, what's going to happen with this? Or did you feel pretty confident having listened to all the podcasts and learned more and more about it? And like, this is the right decision for me?
I think it was scary because the thing about stocks is that a share of an index fund, maybe it's $60, maybe it's $200, but it is something that you could easily make up, especially as a physician, by just working an extra hour or two. You'll make up for any mistake when you're talking about that scale. But just because of the value of property, an investment in property is naturally going to be a much larger sum of money. So I think that first purchase of a rental home was certainly the largest single investment that I was making outside of stocks. So there was a lot of anxiety about it. But I do think that sort of education is key. So at that point, it had literally been over a year of education, and not just podcasts, but books and projections and actually flying out and visiting sites where I was thinking about investing. And eventually I did get to a point where I realized that one of the superpowers of physicians, and I just wrote a blog post about this, but one of the superpowers of a physician, aside from healing, is the ability to generate a physician income. So for better or for worse, if you take a chance on investment and it doesn't go well, you'll be able to recover from that as a physician. And that's just a measure of the blessing of a physician's salary that you worked so hard for. So I kind of got to that point. And when I was making that first purchase, I told my wife and I said, look, I cashed out. I was married and I involved my wife in all of our financial decisions. And I said, I'm going to do this. And I think it's going to go well, but if it doesn't, I will be able to recover. And she said, all right, I'm tired of hearing about this. Just go and do it.
The wives. Yeah. My wife, she was pretty involved originally with real estate investing and she loved short-term rentals. So we had a few of those and still have a couple, but now she's just like, you know what, just do what you think's best. I trust you at this point. So it's worth having their blessing initially, and then it's off to the races, which it was for you. Do you remember that first like rent check, what that felt like when you first got paid and you're like, this is working, I'm a real estate investor now? How did that make you feel?
It was really liberating. And it's funny because, again, I think especially for high-income professionals, doing a deal like that, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. I think it was $94,000. It was a small single-family home, nicely renovated, sort of turnkey in the turnkey model. And I think the check that I was getting at the time was about $150, $900 a month. So it was enough to pay the mortgage because I had a mortgage on it. But the leftover amount was negligible. Maybe it was $50 to $100 or something like that when you consider the property tax and when you consider the hazard insurance and all that. It was liberating because it was income outside of medicine. And for me, that was important because that showed me that even though I'd spent at that point 10 years studying in medicine, and that was sort of pretty much all I knew how to do, that I had the ability to learn new things and generate income outside of medicine. And it's really that sort of money that comes to you passively outside of medicine, passively or actively, honestly, that can set you free if you don't want to do medicine for the rest of your life.
It's not necessarily the amount I think that you make initially. It's just that first deal was like just the proof that you can do it and it worked. And that I have the opportunity to make money passively in another way other than medicine. And exactly what you said, that freedom to kind of practice how you want to, if that continues to be out and you continue to put the hard work in and investing. I know you put the hard work in. So what did it look like after the Little Rock house? It sounds like the races were on, the stack was on, and you just bought a bunch of deals after that. So how was that process as you continued on the real estate journey?
It was in fits and starts. And I think a lot about sort of entrepreneurship and investing is like this. You can put a lot of effort into something and then you just kind of plateau for a little while and then you reach another peak and then you plateau. Maybe you go down into the valley for a little, the valley of despair if something doesn't go wrong, but then you climb back up. I think that's just what I'm learning now, doing the majority of my time in entrepreneurship, is that it's not a linear progression. It was kind of like that. There was a flurry of activity to start. I had that first turnkey rental, and there was a second one that was actually in Birmingham. And then I decided, when I looked at the turnkey product, which for your listeners probably know what it is, but it's basically a rental house that has already been renovated and you're just kind of buying it sort of off the shelf almost. A lot of times they can even come with property managers kind of built in. And I said, wow, that's really convenient, but the return wasn't what I had hoped for. I was hoping for kind of slightly larger returns. I decided to start doing it on my own. I set my sights on Indianapolis as where I was going to do that because it looked like just this town that had a lot going for it. It was sort of recovering from the financial crisis and it had a stable government. It was landlord friendly and there was appreciation. I flew out there. I met a contractor. I met a real estate agent. I just painted for them a vision of what I wanted to accomplish, which was steadily building. I jokingly called it my real estate empire, which is funny, but I wanted to build a robust real estate portfolio. And if we can work on it together, they'll benefit, I'll benefit. And I started buying in Indianapolis. That first trip out, on my last day that I was there, literally about an hour before I had to head back to the airport, I looked at a duplex. That was my first purchase in Indianapolis. It was a duplex. After that, I was hooked on Indianapolis. I liked my team. We started renovating that one. Soon after that, I had this flurry of buying where I bought another 3 duplexes, which I still have those. And then afterwards, I started looking at the numbers and just feeling this desire to sort of scale up and try to make even a bigger impact. I decided to kind of stack up into small apartment buildings. That's when I bought a 7-unit, then an 8-unit as well.
That's great. And way to just take action and get after it and just get out there, fly out there. I'm sure you weren't there for too long, but you flew out there, made your team and got a deal. And folks listening, that's what you got to do sometimes. That's what it takes sometimes to get started, is go explore the market, go network with a realtor and some contractors and handyman and just get out there and get it done. Daniel, the jump from single family to multifamily and then the 7 and 8 unit property, did you notice that it was significantly more work to buy an 8-unit property as it was to buy a single family house?
My reasoning at the time, and I often think about that transition period, and I'll go back into my blog post and actually read the entries about these purchases, because I was thinking that in the same amount of time that I'm vetting a single family home, I could be vetting a much larger property. And it could be a quad, it could be a 6-unit. It's not really that much more work. I do think that was a little bit of a fallacy. That was a number of years ago. I look back on that now. It does start to become a little bit different because there are things that you think of that you may not really consider. But I'll give you an example. So in the 7-unit apartment building, it was fully occupied when I bought it. And some of the tenants were great and we continued renting to them and then just kind of shuffled them around as we renovated units. One of them was initially a great tenant, but then had some health problems and he was actually a hoarder. And his unit started, it was this nidus of infection where there was an incredible pest problem from his unit that was obviously their shared walls. It was affecting a number of other units around him. And due to his health problems, we were having a lot of trouble kind of navigating treatment and cleaning up his unit. It delayed the renovation of all the other things. It is a little bit of a different beast. Now that I'm in a much different space where I'm looking at hundreds of units at once in apartment buildings, that I would say is totally different. It's so much more analysis because the numbers mean so much more. Like a small variation in rent from $20 variation in rent can have incredible implications in terms of your return and in terms of the ability to service a debt. So I would say that that is true. 1-unit building to a 2-unit building, maybe not much of a difference. It starts to actually become different when you get above 4 units. And it's certainly different when you're looking at 100 units or 200 units.
I think the actual path to purchase 1 to 8 units probably isn't that much different, but definitely that management piece gets to it. And I think sometimes folks are like, should I just buy a single family house or should I jump right to the 4-unit? I don't think there's a whole lot of difference from 1 to 4 units, like you mentioned. Oftentimes that economies of scale is helpful, that now I have 4 units that are rented out. And if one person moves out, I'm still getting rent from the other 3. Instead of the single family house where if I have vacancy there, I'm making no income, or the roof goes out, or I got to replace the AC. It really hits your cash flow a lot harder when you don't have those economies of scale. But just something to think about as folks are getting started. And turnkey can be a good way to get started because it's going to help you learn how to invest in real estate and hopefully get a good property. Some of the turnkey providers can be a bit hit or miss, but it's also a good way to get started as you did. It's cool to kind of see your progression from turnkey to I can do this on my own to let's scale and buy some larger properties to now where you are. So tell us a little bit more about where you are now, what you're working on now in terms of real estate.
As I said, I've been running this blog, and it started around the same time when I went through this personal finance awakening, and it's called the Darwinian Doctor. And it kind of reflects at that time what I saw as my evolution. I was evolving into sort of a different type of physician, someone who also does real estate investing and is interested in financial freedom and empowerment. And that was sort of the theme of the blog. And it was just following along with my journey. It followed along with my research that I was doing into investment and stocks versus real estate. I'm very analytical. I would actually pick these things apart and analyze it. The blog posts were sort of the fruits of my labor, and I would write these out. And it actually follows my sort of transition over time. And then eventually, as I realized that I had readership, but not, I would say only the minority of my audience was actually going to follow right in my footsteps. I think that it does take a certain sort of special physician or engineer or lawyer or whatever who is going to fly out to Indianapolis and meet real estate brokers and actually do it all themselves, because maybe it's a bandwidth problem, or maybe there are other issues, or maybe that's just not your style. I realized after a while that it would be great to have something to offer the majority of my readers who are not going to be active real estate investors. So in the beginning of this year, I actually started a real estate investing company called Serious Real Estate. Serious as in Cereus, not be serious like you can get from reheated fried rice, but the Sirius cactus. In the southwestern US, there's a Sirius cactus, and I just loved the sound of it and sort of the double entendre of being serious about real estate. So I started Serious Real Estate, and this company is essentially going to offer passive real estate opportunities. And this is why I'm looking at much larger real estate assets these days of 100-unit apartment buildings or 50-unit, whatever. I think it's going to be a really great option to continue to grow in real estate along with investors, and we can just pull capital together, grow together, and offer an opportunity for people to go passive if they want. Along the way of doing this, I may have mentioned that I'm not in California anymore. I actually moved to Memphis, Tennessee a couple of years ago. And that was another huge transition where I had reached a point where, and I was talking about this with you prior to the recording, but basically just doing the commute, doing the full-time, more than full-time job, because most are, at 1.25 FTEs. And on top of that, I had the Darwinian Doctor blog, and I had the real estate portfolio that I was managing, and something was going to break. And I was trying to figure out how to deal with that situation. But then my wife actually got a job offer in Memphis that was going to be an incredible career opportunity for her. At the time, we were about 40 years old, and it was about time for a midlife crisis. I said, you know what? Let's take the risk. I know that I'm employable as a physician. I'll be able to work pretty much wherever I want. I had the sort of confidence also of these additional streams of income and the other businesses and interests. So I said, let's go ahead and do it. We moved fairly quickly from Southern California to Memphis, Tennessee, and we've been here for about a year and a half. She's doing awesome. And the transition allowed me to go part-time with medicine, where I am working 7 days a month now in medicine as a locum tenens. that's fantastic because it allows me to continue to practice medicine in a very impactful way. I'm going to an area where it's a little bit tough to get physician coverage, especially urologists. And when I come back, I have this bandwidth open to me to continue on with the other interests and the business and continue working on the real estate portfolio. It's been a really good transition, but I would say the majority of my time now is, of course, dedicated to the Darwinian Doctor blog and recording everything that I'm doing there, but also serious real estate. I think that's really going to be the avenue of growth moving forward.
Yeah. A lot to unpack there. I remember I was in residency. I was on OB nights. I remember sitting at the time they were renovating the labor deck. We had this little office in the ICU actually. And I remember reading your blog, the White Coat Investor, Prudent Plastic Surgeon Jordan's blog, thinking like, oh man, I'm going to do this one day. And so it's really cool for me to have the opportunity to get to know you guys and talk with you and hear the journey firsthand. So that's been awesome. Thanks for the blog. I was and have been one of the readers and your readership there. Thanks for doing that. I'm really excited. And it's so cool to hear too that you went from over full-time practicing urologist to investing in real estate and entrepreneurship to now practicing 1 week a year. If you can comment on this, have you noticed that having that flexibility, or I guess having the ability to practice medicine when you want, has made you a better doctor in terms of the care that you're providing, or at least kind of the compassion and empathy aspect of taking care of patients instead of that burnout? Or how have you noticed that aspect been for you?
It's made a tremendous impact. Doing 7 days a month as opposed to 50 or 60 hours a week, it's obviously super different. That week I do in Locum Tenens is I'm on call 24/7, and I ran on the inpatient service. I see all the ER consults. I do the stat Foley consults, and I've scheduled cases. I see patients in clinic, and I'm doing vasectomies. It's a busy week, honestly. I come back very tired, but then I get 3 weeks to do other things and recharge. I think I'm an excellent physician. Towards the end of the 6 years in Southern California, when I was honestly getting fairly burnt out, burning the candle at both ends, doing all of these things, you absolutely, I think, lose empathy. You start to resent a lot of the things about medicine that are frankly a gift. I can say that I'm much happier with this balance, and that it's not for everyone. I think that many physicians really are at a point where they're getting a lot of joy from every single thing they do. And for those people, I think they're blessed and should continue doing that for the rest of their life, never retire, and just do that forever, because I think that's a very blessed position to be in. And I do have a lot of gratitude for my current situation, because I do think it's the best of both worlds. There are certain downsides of having to travel to practice medicine. It's time away from my family. But when I come back, I am present in a way that I never was in Southern California. Back in LA, I would leave the house before my kids would wake up. And by the time I got home, it was 12 hours later, and they were either asleep or my wife was reading them a bedtime story or something like that. And on the weekends, there was this urgency of like, oh, we have to enjoy all this family time because I'm not going to see you during the week. And it was strange. We're in the same house, but I barely saw them. And now I'm so much more involved as a dad. I was at kickball with my son at school. It's ridiculous. I was like, who does a kickball event in the middle of the day at 2 p.m.? But then I went to it because I have this flexibility now. And there's actually tons of dads there. It's an all-boys school. Every single boy had their father there. And for me, that blew my mind, because I was like, I don't think most physicians can do that. Most physicians can't just take off in the middle of the day and go to this thing, unless maybe you plan for it 3 months in advance and you ask for coverage or something like that to make sure that your clinic is covered or whatever. Other professions, strangely enough, have a lot more flexibility and autonomy than most physicians. That was kind of eye-opening, but that's an example of things that I can do now that I never would have been able to do due to the logistics of my previous employment.
Some degree of financial freedom just opens the door and opens so much flexibility to be a better husband, father, physician, experience the passions that you want to in life and really have the opportunity to work on them. It's just so awesome to hear that that's possible. That's why I love doing the podcast, is getting to hear folks' story and their journey. And I learn so much every time. So thanks for that. And what a cool experience for your son too, that you were able to show up to the kickball event at 2:00 that otherwise wouldn't have been able to. Our kids are just always watching and they just want that time with us. I have a 3-year-old and it just is going by so fast. And one rule I have is as soon as I get home from work, I put the phone up on the kitchen counter. I don't touch it until he goes to bed. And it's like, this is just time for me to be with my son because I'm only going to get to do this once. That time is just such a blessing and it's just so much fun. That's partly why I invest in real estate, is so I can have that freedom to spend more time with them and go to the kickball events and do these sorts of things. So thanks for sharing that and sharing your journey.
I think the time with the kids is so precious. They say that, I don't know the exact number, but 90%, 95% of the time you spend with your children is, I think, between the ages of, 0 to 10 or 0 to 15. Yeah. Honestly, I think it is really special. And the ability to do that more now is really, really precious.
Yeah. I mean, it was a lot of hard work to get to where you are. I think if folks are listening to this and think that it was a really easy journey, I know it's not, and it wasn't, but that hard work, I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, has been absolutely worth it to be able to practice medicine how you are now and have that time freedom that you do have now, which is great. Talk to us a little bit more, if you don't mind, about next steps and with serious real estate. What do you think makes passive real estate investing, or the opportunity that you offer for physicians and other investors? What do you think makes that a good investment opportunity for them?
In my vision for serious real estate is basically going to be offering excellent investment opportunities at least 2 or 3 times a year for the next 30 years. I'm in it for the long haul. And over time, it's going to be this incredible community of people who are investing in financial freedom. What I found being in the sort of larger asset space now is that maybe on an individual basis, there is a little bit more risk to plunking down $25,000 or $50,000 into a single investment. I would say that there is a little bit more risk to it than just buying index funds. But because of that, there's a commensurate expectation of a higher return. A good example is you can expect to get an 8 to 10% return in the stock market. And that's over time, that's smoothing out all of the crashes and all of the gains. But your average real estate syndication, you would expect to get maybe a 15% compounded rate of return from something like that. That's if everything goes well and according to plan. But the ability to scale your wealth, I think, through real estate, and also having a lot of that income be tax sheltered through depreciation, is just very special. And it offers this potentially faster way to get to your financial goals. That's what I'm hoping that serious real estate can bring to the investors over time. And I'll say this publicly because this is a potential for serious real estate, but I think also it's going to be a medium for ground up development and the ability of real estate to change cities and develop cities and put cities on a different trajectory for economic prosperity and providing quality housing and employment for all the people involved in that creation, I think is immense. And I hope that one day serious real estate can be a part of that.
I completely agree. I think that we're in a really cool kind of inflection point with ground up development and the opportunity that that's going to have, especially in different cities and different locations around different Ivy League schools or medical campuses. There's just a lot of opportunity, I think, coming from that space in the real estate space as well. And you're exactly right. One amazing apartment complex can completely transform a whole neighborhood or a whole block and just really change that for the better and provide great housing and great amenities. Really excited to hear and continue to follow the journey. I know there'll be some folks who will be interested in investing with you and reaching out and knowing more. So is there a way that folks can do that?
I'm basically ubiquitous on social media as the Darwinian Doctor, Like I'm on TikTok. I've got a lot of followers on TikTok. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Obviously, I've got my blog. So that's probably a great place to find me, thedarwiniandoctor.com. And that's, I think, a really good place to sort of get to know me about what I've been doing over the last decade. For people that are specifically interested in investing in a passive manner into real estate syndications and apartment complexes, that's where I would point you to Serious Real Estate, and that's CEREUS realestate.com.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include all the links in the show notes as well, so folks can give you a follow, reach out to you, go from there. Daniel, this has been awesome. Thanks for your time. Is there anything else you want to hit on before we wrap things up?
I think it was really great talking to you, Alex. Just getting to know you before the recording. I feel like you're doing awesome things. I know that you're having a lot of the similar sort of stresses running the podcast and working full-time job. You got your 3-year-old. Just keep up the good work. I feel you're on a great trajectory.
Thanks. That really means a lot. I really appreciate your time. And we'll have to have you back on again here in another year or so and see how things are going and how things keep growing for you. Looking forward to it.
Me too.
Well, with that, it's been Dr. Daniel Shin and Dr. Alex Schloe with another episode of the Physicians and Properties Podcast. Signing off. Hey, real quick, if you're still listening to this, I'm assuming you got value from it. So I need your help specifically. My 2-year vision with this podcast is to help 100,000 physicians learn how investing in real estate can give you the freedom to practice medicine and live life how you want. There are 2 main ways that a podcast grows. One is through ratings and reviews, and the other is word of mouth. If you can please leave me a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, as well as send this to 1 to 2 friends that you think would get value from it, we can reach the physicians that we want to reach. Thanks in advance, and talk to you on the next episode. Please note that the information shared on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or medical advice. The views expressed on this podcast are those of the host and the guest and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Defense or the United States Air Force.